More than 3,000 years ago, in the heart of Anatolia, an unknown people emerged from among mountains and plains to challenge the greatest powers of their time. They did not come from a great river or from fertile lands, but from harsh, cold, rocky lands. And yet, they came to conquer legendary cities, to face Egyptian pharaohs directly, and to sign one of the first peace treaties in history. They called themselves the people of Hatti. The world would remember them as the Hittites, and for centuries their empire was forgotten, buried beneath the earth until archaeology brought it back to life. This is the story of an empire that rose from nothing to dominate the center of the ancient world. Long before the scribes of Egypt carved the name of the Hittites into stone, before the clay tablets of Babylon recorded their alliances and threats, and centuries before Ramses II met them on the battlefield, the plateau of Anatolia was a mosaic of small kingdoms, fortified villages, and peoples who barely knew of the existence of their distant neighbors. It was a land of contrasts, snow-covered mountains that fed rivers, fertile plains that in summer became dry and hard, and natural passes that connected the Black Sea with the Mediterranean and the Aegean. A place that seemed to stand on the margins of the great river civilizations and yet was destined to shape one of the most powerful empires of the Bronze Age. In this setting, toward the beginning of the second millennium before Christ, Indo-European-speaking groups began to arrive from the north or northeast, perhaps descendants of migrations that had begun centuries earlier in the Pontic steppes or in the Caucasus region. These peoples brought with them new technologies and forms of organization: light horse-drawn war chariots, bronze weapons forged with advanced techniques, and a hierarchical social structure centered on the figure of a military and political leader. They did not arrive in an empty land. Anatolia was already inhabited by the Hattians, a non-Indo-European-speaking people with their own cultural tradition, walled cities, and temples dedicated to local deities. In southeastern and eastern Anatolia, there was also a Hurrian presence, a culture with a strong identity that would influence the Hittites in their religion and art. The interaction between these groups was complex. There was no immediate replacement, but rather a gradual fusion in which the newcomers adopted part of the local culture, especially in religion, while imposing their language in administration and the military sphere. From this synthesis was born the identity that, centuries later, Assyrian and Egyptian scribes would call Hittite, although they themselves referred to their land as Hatti, taking the name of the ancient Hattians. The first political core we recognize as Hittite arose around Hattusa, a city strategically located on an elevated hill and surrounded by fertile valleys. Its location, in central Anatolia, allowed control of the routes that linked north with south and east with west. Around the 17th century before Christ, a leader named Labana, or perhaps his successor Hattusili, the first unified several territories under his command, beginning the tradition of an expansive and militarized kingdom. The choice of Hattusa as capital was not accidental. From there, access to trade routes could be monitored and possible incursions could be defended against. The first Hittite kings were, above all, warriors. Hattusili I launched campaigns toward the south, reaching the rich lands of Syria and establishing contact and conflict with the city-states orbiting around Mesopotamia. His successor, Masili I, carried this expansion even farther. He crossed the Euphrates and, in a feat that would echo for centuries, sacked Babylon itself around 1595 before Christ. This blow, though brief in its benefits since the Hittites did not remain to rule the city, demonstrated the ability of their army to project power over great distances. However, these early triumphs were fragile. The Hittite kingdom of the so-called Old Kingdom was not yet a consolidated empire. Its control over conquered regions depended on the loyalty of local governors and vassals, who often rebelled as soon as central authority weakened. In addition, internal struggles over succession were frequent, and the royal family's tradition included intrigues and murders that could destabilize the entire system. Despite these difficulties, the foundations of Hittite power were laid in these early centuries. They developed an administrative system that combined centralization in the figure of the great king with a network of vassalage. They established formal treaties with their subordinates, specifying military obligations, tribute, and loyalties. using a diplomatic language that would become characteristic of their foreign policy. Cuneiform writing, adopted from Mesopotamia, became the main tool of this bureaucracy, adapted to their Indo-European language to record laws, agreements, and correspondence. On the religious level, the Hittites created a vast and diverse pantheon, integrating the gods of the Hattians, Hurrians, and other cultures with which they came into contact. This inclusive attitude strengthened their control over multicultural territories, as it allowed conquered populations to continue venerating their divinities, now integrated into the divine family of the kingdom. The monarch as high priest played a central role in rituals, thereby reinforcing the sacred legitimacy of his rule. The Hittite army, though not as famous as the Egyptian or Assyrian armies in popular memory, was a fearsome force. It was organized around infantry units and the elite of the war chariots, which could decide the course of a battle. Their campaigns were long and often planned to subdue key cities and secure trade routes. Military logistics, including grain stores and supply routes, was one of the secrets behind their ability to operate far from home. In these early centuries, Hittite identity was forged in a constant balance between the inherited and the new. Language, laws, customs, and political structure combined Indo-European elements with contributions from the native peoples. The image projected outward was that of a strong kingdom, capable of challenging great powers, but internally it was still under construction, seeking the stability that would later allow it to become an empire. The birth of the Hittite kingdom was not a single event, but a process. The arrival of new peoples, fusion with local cultures, the choice of a strategic capital, initial expansion, first triumphs, and first crises. From all this emerged a political entity that, over the course of the centuries, would become one of the major protagonists of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Near East during the Bronze Age. A people who, from the heart of Anatolia, would learn to look beyond their mountains in order to project their influence over distant lands and seas. In the next chapter, we will see how, after these beginnings, the Hittites began to unify power under warrior kings, consolidating their internal authority and preparing for the campaigns that would lead them to clash with the great civilizations of their time. The early history of the Hittites is marked by figures of kings who not only ruled from the throne of Hattusa, but also took up the sword and led their army beyond the known borders. They were monarchs who understood that, to secure their authority, it was not enough to administer the capital or collect tribute. They had to demonstrate strength on the battlefield, protect trade routes, and expand the territory until it became a true kingdom of Anatolia. One of the first names that resonates in this stage is Labana, considered by some to be the dynastic founder. Although his figure blends with legend, the inscriptions present him as a leader who consolidated a core of power from which he projected his authority over neighboring kingdoms. Labana did not rule over a centralized state as we would imagine it today, but over a network of cities and territories governed by relatives and allies who swore loyalty to him in exchange for protection and commercial advantages. But it was his successor, Hattusili I, who took the decisive step toward unification and expansion. The name Hattusili literally means man of Hattusa, and its choice was not accidental. He himself moved the capital to that strategic city in central Anatolia, making it the heart of the kingdom. From there, he launched campaigns toward the south and east with a clear objective: to control the routes leading to Syria and Mesopotamia. Hattusili's campaigns were meticulous. First, he secured control of central Anatolia, subduing cities that had been historical rivals and sealing alliances with those that accepted Hittite authority. Then he turned his gaze towards Syria, a region rich in resources and, above all, key to the trade in metals, timber, and luxury goods. In these expeditions, the Hittites faced well-fortified city-states, accustomed to diplomacy with powers such as Babylon and Egypt. Hattusili was not only a warrior, he was also a political strategist. He knew that conquest was not enough if the loyalty of the conquered territories was not secured. For this reason, he established the Hittite vassalage system, which would become one of the defining traits of his empire. This system consisted of forcing local rulers to sign treaties in which they recognized the great king as their lord, committed themselves to paying tribute, providing troops in case of war, and not allying with enemies of the kingdom. In exchange, They retained a certain degree of autonomy and received Hittite military protection. Hattusili's heir, Mursili I, took this policy of expansion to a culminating point. After only a few years of rule, he carried out one of the boldest campaigns of the entire Bronze Age. He crossed the Euphrates and marched against the powerful city of Babylon. Located hundreds of kilometers from Hattusa, the fall of Babylon around 1595 before Christ was a blow that resonated throughout the Near East. However, the Hittites did not occupy the city. Their incursion was more of a lightning raid, a prestige strike that weakened one of the oldest and richest powers in the region. Paradoxically, this triumph marked the beginning of a difficult stage. The death of Mursili triggered internal struggles for the throne, the Hittite dynastic system, in which brothers and other relatives could claim power, lent itself to conspiracies and assassinations. For years, palace intrigues and vassal rebellions weakened the kingdom, causing much of what had been conquered in Syria to be lost. Even so, the mark left by these first warrior kings was lasting. Their leadership style, based on constant demonstrations of military power, coercive diplomacy, and the integration of conquered cultures, established the pattern their successors would follow. The Hittites understood that their geographical location, at the crossroads between the Aegean, the Black Sea, and Mesopotamia, gave them a unique advantage. They could control the flow of goods and armies passing through Anatolia, provided they maintained an active presence in key regions. Furthermore, the prestige of these early campaigns consolidated the figure of the great king as supreme leader, not only of the Hittites, but also of a diverse group of peoples who accepted his authority. The notion of a kingdom of Hatti became firmly established, and with it the idea that survival depended as much on the sword as on the written word in treaties. On the cultural level, this stage also left its mark. Campaigns towards Syria and Mesopotamia brought artistic, religious, and technological influences with them. Hurrian and Mesopotamian gods began to be integrated into the Hittite pantheon, and artisans adopted foreign styles in goldsmithing and ceramics. This cultural openness, born from both war and diplomacy, would become one of the distinctive features of the future empire. However, the warrior kings also faced a bitter lesson. Rapid expansion could bring instability if solid internal structures were not secured. The dynastic crises following the death of Mursili I showed that an empire could not be sustained by military victories alone. It needed clear laws, orderly successions, and a balance between the center and the provinces. In the next chapter, we will see how, after this period of conquests and crises, the Hittites began to build the foundations of a more lasting empire, with a more complex administration, fortified cities, and a system of control that would allow them to reach their height. Unification had been achieved by the sword. Now they had to learn how to govern a vast and diverse territory. After the campaigns of Hattusili I and Mursili I, the Hittite kingdom had demonstrated its ability to project power over long distances and confront the great powers of the Bronze Age. However, those initial triumphs had also revealed the kingdom's structural weaknesses, succession problems, internal rebellions, and the difficulty of maintaining effective control over distant territories. The next step for the Hittites would not be so much to conquer new lands as to build an imperial structure capable of enduring over time. The first great transformation was the consolidation of Hattusa as the political, military, and religious capital. Situated in a strategic position, protected by hills and natural walls, the city became the object of an ambitious program of fortification and urban planning. The outer walls, reinforced with towers and monumental gates, served not only as defense, but also as a symbol of the great king's power. Each gate had a ceremonial and political function. The Lion Gate, with its stone-carved sculptures, reminded those who entered that they were under the protection and authority of the monarch. The King's Gate displayed figures evoking the tutelary divinities of the kingdom. Inside, Hattusa was organized into administrative, residential, and religious districts. The Great Temple, dedicated to the storm god and the sun goddess of Arina, occupied the city's spiritual center. Around it were warehouses filled with grain, oil, and wine, essential resources for sustaining both the population and the armies on campaign. This centralized control of agricultural surplus allowed the court to feed officials, artisans, and troops for long periods. regardless of harvest conditions. In the administrative sphere, the Hittites perfected the use of cuneiform writing, adapted to their own Indo-European language. Clay tablets recorded not only treaties and diplomatic correspondence, but also laws, censuses, lists of tribute, and judicial rulings. This bureaucratic apparatus was fundamental to maintaining the cohesion of a diverse territory, populated by people of different languages and customs. In many provinces, local populations were allowed to maintain their own laws and structures as long as they recognized the supremacy of the great king and fulfilled their military and fiscal obligations. One of the most innovative elements of the Hittite system was its network of vassalage. Unlike other empires that imposed governors directly from the capital, the Hittites preferred to keep local leaders in power, provided they signed a treaty of submission. These treaties, carefully drafted and sealed with religious oaths, established the duties of the vassal: absolute loyalty, sending troops in case of war, regular payment of tribute, and prohibition of alliances with enemies of the kingdom. Failure to comply with these terms was considered not only political treason, but also an offense against the gods, which gave the great king a sacred justification for punishing rebellion. Hittite diplomacy thus became a tool as important as the army. Through royal marriages, exchanges of gifts and treaties, the great king wove a network of alliances that strengthened his position without the need for constant campaigns. The archives of Hattusa preserve letters addressed to Egyptian pharaohs, Babylonian kings, and rulers of Syrian city-states, discussing everything from military matters to shipments of horses, grain, or specialized artisans. But the construction of the empire was not limited to politics and administration. It also involved the development of a shared cultural identity. Religion played a key role in this process. Far from imposing a single cult, the Hittites incorporated local gods into the state pantheon. The result was an assembly of 1,000 gods, in which the divinities of Anatolia, Syria, Mesopotamia, and other regions coexisted under the symbolic authority of the great king as high priest. This inclusive approach facilitated the integration of conquered peoples and reinforced the monarch's legitimacy. On the military level, the Hittite army evolved from a force composed of contingents from clans and allied cities into a more professional and centralized apparatus. The elite remained the war chariot corps, but the infantry was expanded and organized into permanent units. Hittite chariots, heavier than Egyptian ones, could carry 3 men, a driver, a spearman, and an archer, giving them greater offensive capacity in close combat. This model, though less maneuverable, was ideal for breaking enemy formations and for sieges, where it could be used as a mobile firing platform. The construction of the empire was also reflected in the economy. Control of the trade routes crossing Anatolia made it possible to tax the passage of caravans and fleets. Metals, especially copper and silver, were exported in exchange for tin, essential for the production of bronze. Coastal cities, under direct control or under loyal vassals, secured access to luxury goods such as ivory, lapis lazuli, and fine textiles. This growth brought internal challenges. The Hittite nobility, composed of princes, generals, and high officials, accumulated power and wealth. The monarch had to carefully balance concessions to these elites to prevent them from becoming rivals. Palace intrigues remained a constant danger, and Hittite history from this period includes episodes of conspiracies, depositions, and even royal assassinations. Despite these tensions, the result of this phase was a stronger state, capable of resisting the ups and downs of international politics. The Hittites had gone from being a warrior kingdom to a true empire, with a complex administrative structure, active diplomacy, and a cultural identity that united diverse peoples under one authority. In the following decades, this apparatus would allow them not only to confront powers such as Egypt and Assyria on equal terms, but also to compete for control of the most coveted regions of the Near East. However, that same power and prestige would inevitably attract conflicts with the great rivals of the age. In the next chapter, we will see how religion, beyond its spiritual role, became one of the pillars of political legitimacy in the Hittite Empire, and how its kings used the gods to reinforce their authority over a territory as vast as it was diverse. At the heart of the Hittite Empire, power was not sustained only by armies and treaties. Its true strength also lay in a symbolic and spiritual fabric that united the great king with the gods, and through them, with his subjects. In the Hittite mindset, politics and religion were inseparable. To rule was not only to administer a territory, but to fulfill a sacred mission. The Hittites inherited and transformed a complex religious tradition, the result of the fusion between ancient Anatolian cults, especially those of the Hurrian influences, and, to a lesser extent, Mesopotamian ones. The Hittite pantheon came to be known as the assembly of 1,000 gods, a metaphor that, though exaggerated, illustrates well the enormous diversity of divinities they worshipped. Each city, each valley, each spring or mountain could have its own protective god, and all of them were formally integrated into the state religious framework. At the summit of this pantheon stood two central figures: the storm god of Hatti, sovereign of the sky and lord of the rains, and the sun goddess of Arinna, source of light and guarantor of order. The great king and the great queen acted as high priests of these principal deities. In public ceremonies, the monarch offered sacrifices and prayers not only as a political leader, but as an intermediary between the human and the divine worlds. Hittite rituals were elaborate and carefully regulated. During major festivities, such as the spring festival Puruli, the king processed through the temples of Hattusa, accompanied by priests, musicians, and dancers. The purpose of these ceremonies was not only to worship, but to symbolically renew the pact between the gods and the kingdom. The promise of prosperity in exchange for obedience and devotion. Sacrifices included animals, libations of wine and oil, and, on occasion, offerings of bread and sweets specially prepared for the festival. The great temple of Hattusa was not the only important cult center. At the open-air sanctuary of Yazilikaya, located on the outskirts of the capital, rocky walls were decorated with reliefs showing processions of gods and goddesses, each identified by name and attributes. Rituals linked to the agricultural calendar and the solar cycle were celebrated there, reinforcing the idea that cosmic order and political order were intertwined. One of the most distinctive aspects of Hittite religion was its integrative flexibility. When they conquered a territory, they did not destroy local cults, but incorporated their gods into the imperial pantheon. These gods became symbolic relatives of the main divinities of Hatti, which facilitated acceptance of Hittite rule among subject populations. Thus, Hurrian gods such as Teshub, the storm god, or Hebat, the mother goddess, were integrated without friction, and their myths became part of official religious literature. Religion was also an instrument of diplomacy and legitimacy. Vassalage treaties included oaths invoking the gods as witnesses and guarantors. Breaking a pact was not only betraying the great king, it was offending the divinities, which brought curses and calamities. In the tablets that have survived, these oaths are accompanied by long lists of divine punishments for the perjurer, from the sterility of his fields to the total destruction of his lineage. This sacred dimension gave additional weight to Hittite politics, reinforcing obedience through fear of the god's wrath. The Great Queen, known as the Tawananna, also played an important religious role. She was not simply the king's wife, but a figure with authority of her own, even after becoming a widow. The Tawananna officiated rituals, supervised temples, and could influence important political decisions. In some periods, rivalry between the king and queen, or between the queen and the heir, caused tensions at court, since the authority of the Tawananna was vital to the religious and, by extension, political stability of the kingdom. Hittite beliefs were also imbued with a strong sense of the monarch's moral responsibility. If the country suffered droughts, plagues, or military defeats, it was interpreted as a sign that the king had failed in his religious duty. In such cases, purification rituals could be held, or the king could even be temporarily replaced in certain sacred acts to restore harmony with the gods. This conception made religion function as a form of control over the sovereign himself, who always had to present himself as devout and just in order to avoid suspicion of divine displeasure. On the mythical level, the Hittites inherited cosmogonic and epic stories, some adapted from the Hurrians, describing struggles between gods, the ordering of the world, and the role of humans within it. These myths were not simple stories, but guides to behavior and legitimations of the established order. The idea that the king ruled by mandate of the gods was present in every public act, from military campaigns undertaken with sacrifices and oracles to the inauguration of temples or the signing of treaties. Hittite religious practice, also included a vast body of divination and magic rituals. Before a battle or an important political decision, priests consulted the gods through observation of the flight of birds, examination of the livers of sacrificed animals, or the casting of small figurines. If the omens were unfavorable, the king could delay a campaign or change his plans, convinced that acting against the divine will would bring disaster. This world of gods and rituals was not a mere ornament of political life, it was its foundation. The great king was, in essence, the first servant of the gods, and his authority was considered legitimate only as long as he fulfilled his sacred duties. Religion not only united the people of Hatti under one spiritual umbrella, but also provided the symbolic framework that held together a multicultural and geographically dispersed empire. In the next chapter, we will see how this political religious structure would be tested in one of the greatest challenges the empire faced, the struggle with Egypt for control of Syria, a rivalry that would culminate in the famous Battle of Kadesh, where the two superpowers of the ancient world would measure their strength in an unprecedented confrontation. At the height of its power, the Hittite Empire stretched from the mountains of western Anatolia to the fertile plains of northern Syria. It was a vast and heterogeneous domain, sustained by military strength, diplomacy, and a carefully designed system of vassalage. However, that same territorial breadth placed them on a collision course with another of the great powers of the Bronze Age, Egypt. The Syrian Strip, with cities such as Kadesh, Aleppo, Ugarit, and Amurru, was not only a trade corridor, it was the point of contact and friction between two worlds. On one side was the world of the Nile, with its caravans and its diplomacy ruled from Thebes. On the other, the world of Hattusa, whose routes crossed Anatolia and reached the ports of the Levantine coast. Controlling Syria meant dominating the trade arteries that brought metals, timber, oil, wine, horses, and luxury goods from Mesopotamia and the eastern Mediterranean. For generations, control of this region changed hands repeatedly. In times of Hittite weakness, Egypt extended its influence northward, incorporating Syrian city-states as vassals. When the Hittites regained strength, they pushed southward, wresting enclaves from the Egyptians and forcing local rulers to swear loyalty to the great king of Hatti. Tension between the two powers intensified under the reign of Suppiluliuma I, one of the most notable and ambitious monarchs in Hittite history. In the late 14th century before Christ, Suppiluliuma reorganized the army, strengthened the administration, and launched a series of campaigns that would forever change the political map of the region. Taking advantage of Egyptian weakness after the turbulent Amarna period, when pharaohs such as Akhenaten had focused their energies on internal religious reforms, Suppiluliuma advanced into Syria with astonishing speed and effectiveness. In a series of offensives, the Hittites captured Kadesh and other strategic cities, cutting off Egyptian access to the north. Not only that, they consolidated alliances with local kingdoms, ensuring that their control did not depend solely on military garrisons, but on the loyalty of rulers who had signed treaties under divine oath. These campaigns were not only military, but also diplomatic. Hittite envoys worked to win over Syrian elites, presenting Hatti as a protector against Egyptian ambitions. It was also during this period that an episode occurred revealing the intensity of the rivalry and the political complexity of the moment. According to Hittite chronicles, after the death of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, his widow, possibly Ankhesenamun, sent a letter to Suppiluliuma asking him for a son to marry her and make him pharaoh of Egypt. The Hittite monarch, suspicious at first, finally accepted and sent his son Zananza. However, the prince never reached Egypt. He was murdered on the way, an act Suppiluliuma interpreted as Egyptian betrayal. In response, he launched new campaigns against the border territories, intensifying a conflict that was already almost inevitable. Control of Syria, however, was not easy to maintain. The region was dotted with city-states with their own ambitions, and any sign of weakness in Hatti or Egypt could trigger rebellions. The Hittites established garrisons at key points, such as Kadesh, and used princes of the royal family as governors to guarantee direct loyalty to the great king. Even so, the distance from Hattusa and the constant Egyptian pressure made Syria, in the words of some modern chroniclers, the most valuable and most fragile jewel of the empire. In Egypt, the rise of Ramses II to the throne marked a change in the dynamics of the confrontation. Ramses was young, ambitious, and determined to restore Egyptian influence in the Levant. His first campaigns were directed precisely against Hittite positions in Syria. In one of them, around 1274 before Christ, the city of Kadesh became the epicenter of one of the most famous confrontations of antiquity, a clash that would bring together tens of thousands of soldiers, hundreds of war chariots, and two of the greatest powers of their time in a direct duel. The rivalry for control of Syria was not only a matter of prestige, but a strategic necessity. For the Hittites, losing Kadesh and its surroundings meant opening the door for Egypt to advance northward, threatening their control over the routes connected to Anatolia. For Egypt, recovering these cities meant securing a protective barrier against Hatti and reopening the trade channels that brought wealth to its temples and palaces. In this context, the region became a living frontier, a space of constant war, espionage, and frantic diplomacy. Local rulers sent letters both to Hattusa and to Thebes, sometimes swearing loyalty to one and betraying him shortly afterward in favor of the other. Treaties were broken, alliances were reshaped, and trade caravans always traveled at the risk of being stopped by enemy force. The struggle between Egypt and Hatti over Syria would not be resolved through minor skirmishes. Both powers knew that the fate of the region would be decided in a direct and decisive confrontation. That confrontation would soon come on the plain of Kadesh, in a battle that, beyond its immediate result, would mark a milestone in the military and diplomatic history of humanity. In the next chapter, we will enter fully into that crucial moment, the Battle of Kadesh, the great clash of chariots and armies where Ramses II and Muwatalli II would test not only their military strength, but their ability to tilt the balance of power in the ancient Near East. The year was 1274 before Christ, and the sun beat down fiercely on the plain of the Orontes River in present-day Syria. There, at a strategic point controlling the routes north and south, stood the city of Kadesh, a walled fortress that had changed hands several times between Hittites and Egyptians. At that moment it was under the control of Hatti, ruled by Muwatalli II, the great king, and protected by a contingent that represented not only the power of Anatolia, but also that of its allies and vassals. From the south advanced the young and ambitious pharaoh Ramses II, determined to reclaim the city as part of Egyptian dominion. Ramses sought not only a military triumph, but also a prestige blow that would consolidate his image as the great restorer of the empire. To do this, he mobilized a colossal army, divided into 4 divisions: Amun, Ra, Ta, and Sutek, each with thousands of men and supported by units of light, fast, and maneuverable war chariots. Muwatalli II, for his part, knew he could not afford to lose Kadesh. The city was the key to southern Syria and a symbol of Hittite power in the region. He mobilized an equally impressive army, reinforced by contingents from his vassal kingdoms, from Anatolia to the Levant. His chariot force, heavier than the Egyptian one and capable of carrying 3 men, would be the core of his strategy. The sources we have for the battle are mostly Egyptian. Monumental inscriptions in temples such as Abu Simbel, the Ramesseum, and Luxor. Ramses ordered his version of events to be carved in stone, in which he, in an act of solitary heroism, saved his army from destruction. However, Hittite archives and modern analysis suggest a much more complex story. Ramses planned to surprise the Hittites before they had gathered all their forces, but Muwatalli II was faster in his preparation. He hid his main army behind the city of Kadesh and sent scouts and spies to deceive the Egyptians about his true position. Ramses, believing the Hittites were far away, advanced with the Amun division in front, while the other divisions marched at a distance. This dispersion of forces would prove to be a costly mistake. When Ramses camped north of Kadesh, confident that the enemy was not yet nearby, the main Hittite chariot force crossed the Orontes River and attacked by surprise. The Ra division, marching behind Amun, was caught off guard and shattered within minutes. The heavy and powerful Hittite chariots broke through the Egyptian lines and ran down the soldiers in a chaos of screams, dust, and blood. The Amun division, where the pharaoh was located, was quickly surrounded. In his inscriptions, Ramses describes this moment as an absolute crisis, in which he found himself abandoned by his troops and forced to fight personally to hold back the Hittites until reinforcements arrived. Beyond the propagandistic exaggeration, the truth is that the situation for Egypt was critical. The initial Hittite attack came close to turning the battle into a crushing victory for Hatti. Ramses' fortune changed with the timely arrival of reinforcements, probably mercenaries and allies from Amurru or from the Ptah division. With them, the Egyptians were able to counterattack, pushing the Hittite chariots back toward the river. Muwatalli II, who had kept part of his troops in reserve, decided not to risk a total confrontation that could turn against him, and withdrew his army to defensive positions in Kadesh. The result was an indecisive battle. Ramses claimed victory, presenting himself as the hero who had saved Egypt from destruction. Muwatalli II, for his part, maintained control of Kadesh, which in strategic terms meant that the Hittites had achieved their main objective. The city did not return to Egyptian hands during the pharaoh's lifetime. Beyond the immediate result, Kadesh became a turning point in the relationship between the two powers. The battle demonstrated that neither Egypt nor Hatti could impose itself definitively in Syria without taking enormous risks. It also highlighted the high cost of maintaining such large armies far from their bases: logistical strain, difficulty coordinating forces, and vulnerability to intelligence errors. Years later, tensions continued, but exhaustion led both sides to seek a more stable solution. Thus was born the Treaty of Kadesh, signed around 1258 before Christ, between Ramses II and Hattusili III, brother and successor of Muwatalli II. This treaty, inscribed on clay tablets in cuneiform writing and also in Egyptian hieroglyphs, is the first international peace agreement known to history, and it established a pact of non-aggression, mutual assistance in case of external attacks, and the return of political fugitives. Peace was not only a diplomatic act, it sealed a new era of relations between Egypt and Hatti. Commercial exchanges resumed, caravans once again crossed Syria, and diplomatic embassies regularly traveled between Thebes and Hattusa. A diplomatic marriage even took place. A Hittite princess was sent to Egypt to marry Ramses II, a gesture that symbolized reconciliation between two worlds that had fought fiercely on the plain of Kadesh. The Battle of Kadesh, with its mixture of cunning, chaos, and propaganda, left a lasting legacy. For the Egyptians, it was a story of royal heroism. For the Hittites, confirmation that they could face the power of the Nile as equals. And for history, it was a reminder that war is not always decided by a crushing victory, but sometimes by the ability to resist and force the adversary to negotiate. In the next chapter, we will see how, after Kadesh, the Hittite Empire reached its greatest extent under kings such as Suppiluliuma II, consolidating a system of control that stretched from Anatolia to the Levant, but that also began to show the cracks that, in the future, would lead to its collapse. In Hittite history, few names resonate as strongly as Suppiluliuma I. His reign marked the moment when Hatti went from being a regional power disputing influence in Anatolia and Syria to becoming a fully formed empire, capable of rivaling Egypt, Babylon, and Assyria on equal terms. When Suppiluliuma ascended the throne in the mid-14th century before Christ, the Hittite kingdom was not at its best. Dynastic intrigues, the loss of territories, and internal instability had eroded the authority of the great king. Suppiluliuma, however, demonstrated from the beginning an exceptional combination of military, diplomatic, and administrative skills. His first priority was to consolidate Anatolia. He launched campaigns to subdue the rebellious cities of the west and north, securing trade routes and sources of resources. With the internal borders pacified, he was able to focus on his main objective, Syria. On this front, Suppiluliuma showed a calculated strategy. He took advantage of Egypt's internal tensions during the so-called Amarna period, when pharaohs such as Akhenaten focused on religious reforms and neglected their domains in the Levant. In a series of lightning campaigns, Suppiluliuma captured key cities such as Aleppo and Kadesh and extended Hittite influence to the gates of Damascus. Local kings and princes, faced with this demonstration of force, agreed to sign treaties of vassalage, committing themselves to pay tribute and contribute troops to the imperial army. Suppiluliuma's diplomacy was as sharp as his sword. Instead of imposing direct control over all conquered cities, he consolidated alliances through marriages and pacts. One example of his diplomatic skill is the episode with the widowed Queen of Egypt, Ankhesenamun, who, after the death of Tutankhamun, asked him to send one of his sons to marry her and become pharaoh. Although Suppiluliuma accepted, Prince Sanansa was murdered on the way to Egypt, an incident that chilled relations and probably triggered Hittite military reprisals along the Egyptian borders. Under Suppiluliuma, the empire achieved remarkable internal stability. Trade routes functioned, grain warehouses were full, and the authority of the great king was respected from the Black Sea to the Levant. His legacy was a cohesive empire, with efficient administration, active diplomacy, and an army capable of projecting power throughout the Near East. After the death of Suppiluliuma, probably caused by an epidemic contracted after military campaigns, his successors inherited both his empire and its challenges. Among them was Muwatalli II, who decades later would be remembered for his role in the famous Battle of Kadesh against Ramses II. Muwatalli II ascended the throne at a time when external pressure was increasing. Egypt, under Ramses, was determined to recover influence in Syria. Assyria, in the east, was beginning to emerge as an aggressive power, and internal revolts in vassal territories threatened the stability achieved by Suppiluliuma. One of Muwatalli II's most discussed decisions was to move the capital from Hattusa to a new location farther south, probably Tarhuntassa, closer to the theater of operations in Syria. This measure, though practical from a military point of view, was controversial. Hattusa was not only the political capital, but also the religious center of the empire, and the relocation caused tensions with the clergy and the nobility. In the military sphere, Muwatalli II concentrated resources on preparing for the confrontation with Egypt that would culminate at Kadesh. He mobilized contingents from all his vassal kingdoms, forming a multinational army in which Hittites fought alongside Hurrians, Luwians, and allies from the Levant. His strategic victory at Kadesh, holding the city and frustrating the Egyptian advance, consolidated the Hittite position in Syria, even though the battle was recorded as a draw in the propaganda of both sides. After Kadesh, Muwatalli II maintained a precarious balance on the southern front, while watching the growing Assyrian threat in the east. His policy was pragmatic. He reinforced garrisons, cultivated relations with loyal vassals, and avoided opening multiple fronts simultaneously. However, his death opened a new phase of succession instability that would test the empire's resilience. The Hittite height under Suppiluliuma I and Muwatalli II was a period of expansion, masterful diplomacy, and strategic victories. It was also a stage in which the empire reached the limit of what it could effectively administer. The vast territory, external threats, and internal tensions planted the seeds of the challenges that, in later generations, would become increasingly difficult to contain. In the next chapter, we will move away from high politics and military campaigns to enter the daily life of the Empire of Hatti, exploring how its people lived, what they ate, how they dressed, how they traded, and how society was organized beyond the walls of the capital. When we think of the Hittite Empire, it is easy to imagine only kings on their thrones, columns of war chariots crossing the plains, or solemn religious processions in the temples of Hattusa. However, the true life of the empire did not beat only in the court or on the battlefields, but in the cities, villages, and fields that sustained millions of people. In those places, far from diplomatic intrigues and military chronicles, the daily life of an empire unfolded one that had learned to organize itself in order to survive in a territory as vast as it was diverse. Hattusa, the capital, was the center of that urban life. Its cyclopean walls, with monumental gates such as the Lion Gate or the King's Gate, not only protected the city, but projected a message of power. Inside them, paved streets connected residential neighborhoods, warehouses, craft workshops, and temples. The houses of common citizens were modest, built with adobe on stone foundations, with flat roofs that served as additional space for drying products or sleeping on warm summer nights. Most inhabitants were farmers or herders who lived in villages near the cities and went to markets to sell their surplus. The climate and terrain of Anatolia required varied agriculture. Barley, wheat, lentils, chickpeas, olives, and vines formed the basis of the diet, complemented by fruits such as figs and pomegranates. Livestock, sheep, goats, pigs, and oxen provided meat, milk, wool, and labor power. In the markets, trade was intense. Local products were exchanged for imported goods. tin from distant regions to make bronze, ivory from Africa, lapis lazuli from Central Asia, and fine woods from Lebanon. Although the Hittite economy was largely redistributive, with the central state controlling much of the surplus, there was also freer private trade, especially in border and port cities. Craftsmanship was a vital element of the urban economy. In the workshops of Hattusa and other cities, blacksmiths, goldsmiths, potters, and weavers produced goods both for local consumption and for trade. Hittite ceramics, often decorated with geometric motifs or designs inspired by nature, were valued for their quality and durability. Goldsmiths worked gold and silver to produce jewelry, diadems, and amulets, often with religious motifs. Hittite society was organized hierarchically. At the top, the great king and the great queen concentrated political and religious power. Below them, an aristocracy made up of high officials, military commanders, and provincial governors controlled the lands and administered justice. At the middle level, merchants, artisans, and free peasants led relatively autonomous lives, always under the laws and taxes of the state. At the base of the social pyramid were slaves, who could be prisoners of war, debtors, or children of slaves. Unlike in other cultures, Hittite slaves could, in some cases, buy their freedom or be freed by their masters. Formal education was reserved mainly for the elites. Scribes, trained in palace schools, learned to read and write in cuneiform and Anatolian hieroglyphs. Their role was crucial. They drafted treaties, recorded inventories, kept accounts of warehouses, and wrote diplomatic letters. Many administrative documents have reached us in the form of clay tablets, allowing us to know minute details of the economic, judicial, and military life of the empire. In the family sphere, Hittite society was patriarchal, but women enjoyed more rights than we might imagine for the period. They could own property, initiate commercial transactions, and even participate in legal disputes. Queens and priestesses in particular had considerable influence not only in religion, but also in politics and diplomacy. Daily life was marked by the seasons and by the religious calendar. Festivals were moments of community celebration, with processions, banquets, and sacrifices. Puruli, the spring festival, celebrated the renewal of the earth and the victory of order over chaos, symbolized in myths by the deeds of the storm god. During these festivities, the city filled with music, dances, and games, and the king himself participated in ceremonies that reinforced his bond with the gods and with the people. As for military life, although most peasants served as soldiers only when necessary, there was a professional corps of warriors and chariot drivers who trained regularly. The presence of garrisons at strategic points and the rotation of troops between borders helped maintain the cohesion and discipline of the army. Health and medicine were closely linked to religion. Physicians practiced a combination of herbal treatments, practical interventions, and magical rituals to combat illness. Many ailments were believed to be divine punishments, and for that reason both healers and priests were consulted to obtain healing. Records mention remedies made from local plants, such as thyme and mint, as well as complex purification ceremonies. Despite its power, the empire was not isolated from everyday difficulties. Droughts, plagues, and poor harvests could generate famines, forcing the state to distribute grain from central warehouses. In times of crisis, control of food was a political tool. Securing bread meant securing loyalty. Life in the heart of Hatti thus combined the solemnity of a centralized state with the diversity of local cultures and traditions. It was an empire that lived between the magnificence of palaces and the simplicity of villages, between the thunder of war chariots and the constant murmur of markets. A world where imperial greatness was sustained by the anonymous hands of thousands of men and women who cultivated the land, forged metals, tapped cuneiform signs into clay, or prepared offerings for the gods. In the next chapter, we will see how this organized and relatively prosperous life would be threatened by a cluster of external and internal factors: rebellions, droughts, pressure from new enemies, and, finally, the arrival of a force that would forever change the map of the Eastern Mediterranean, the feared Sea Peoples. At the end of the 13th century before Christ, the Hittite Empire, which for generations had dominated Anatolia and extended its influence through Syria and part of the Levant, began to show signs of weakness. It was not a sudden collapse, but a slow and cumulative process. Like a fortress whose walls gradually crack before collapsing. Internal tensions, pressure from external enemies, and climate changes created a perfect storm that would bring an end to the kingdom of Hatti. The first signs of crisis came from the farthest borders. In the east, Assyria was transforming into an expansive and aggressive power. What had once been a regional kingdom became a militarized state capable of launching campaigns beyond the Euphrates. Its armies began to dispute control of strategic areas in northern Syria, weakening Hittite domination over key cities. In the west, Luwian tribes and other peoples of western Anatolia took advantage of the center's distractions to claim their independence. Although they could not match the strength of the imperial army in a direct confrontation, they resorted to guerrilla tactics, harassing caravans and attacking isolated garrisons. This forced Hattusa to divert resources and troops that would have been needed on other fronts. Internally, Hittite politics was marked by dynastic tensions and power struggles. Successions to the throne were rarely peaceful. Brothers, sons, and nephews could claim the title of Great King, backed by factions of the nobility or by provinces loyal to their interests. These conflicts weakened central authority and fragmented power. In some cases, the more distant provinces acted almost independently, maintaining only nominal loyalty to Hattusa. Environmental factors were added to all this. Modern climate studies indicate that around 1200 before Christ, there was a prolonged drought in the eastern Mediterranean. For an empire whose economic base was agricultural, lack of rain meant poor harvests, grain shortages, and growing hunger. The reserves stored in the capital and provincial centers could cushion the crisis for a time, but repeated bad harvests eventually eroded social stability. It was in the midst of this scenario of weakness that a new threat appeared: the Sea Peoples. These groups, formed by various ethnicities and origins, burst into the eastern Mediterranean like an unstoppable tide. Armed, organized, and accompanied by women, children, and animals, they were not mere invading armies. They were entire migrations in search of new lands. Their ability to move and their mastery of the sea allowed them to strike coastal cities by surprise and quickly penetrate inland. The first wave struck the coasts of Anatolia and Cyprus. The port cities, key to Hittite trade, were devastated or conquered. This meant not only the loss of resources and trade routes, but also the interruption of the flow of tin necessary to produce bronze. Without this alloy, the production of weapons and tools became more difficult, precisely when they were most needed. The advance of the Sea Peoples southward took them to the vassal lands of the Levant, some of which, weakened by years of war and famine, changed their loyalty or were unable to resist. The routes connecting Anatolia with Syria were cut, isolating Hattusa from its most valuable territories. The Hittite chronicles of this period are fragmentary, and in many cases the silence is eloquent. The archives of Hattusa stop recording regular activities and international treaties as if the administrative machinery of the empire had stopped. This coincides with archaeological evidence of destruction in several important cities, both in Anatolia and Syria. In the final years of the empire, King Suppiluliuma II attempted to regain control. The surviving inscriptions from his reign mention naval campaigns against enemies in Cyprus, a notable fact given that the Hittites were not traditionally a maritime power. However, these isolated victories were not enough to reverse the general decline. The enemy was not a single kingdom that could be defeated in a great battle, but a series of scattered and persistent threats that wore down the empire from every angle. Finally, Hattusa itself fell. It is not known with certainty who was responsible. It may have been a direct attack by hostile peoples, an internal rebellion, or a combination of both. What is certain is that the city was abandoned and its walls, temples, and palaces were left in ruins. The political and religious heart of the Hittites stopped beating, and with it the empire disappeared as a unified entity. In the vacuum they left, the Neo-Hittite kingdoms emerged in southern Anatolia and northern Syria. These smaller states preserved part of the Hittite language, religion, and traditions, but they no longer had the strength to dominate the region. They were local actors in a transformed eastern Mediterranean, where new powers such as Assyria were preparing to impose their hegemony. The Hittite collapse was part of a broader phenomenon, the collapse of the Late Bronze Age. In the span of a few decades, empires and kingdoms that had dominated the region for centuries disappeared or were reduced to their smallest expression. Egypt survived, but weakened. Ugarit, Mycenae, and many other cities were destroyed. The Sea Peoples, together with climate changes, internal crises, and pressure from new peoples, reconfigured the political and cultural map of the Mediterranean. For the Hittites, the arrival of the Sea Peoples was not the only cause of their fall, but it was the final blow that brought down a building already full of cracks. Their legacy, however, was not entirely lost. The memory of Hatti survived in later kingdoms and in the clay tablets buried in the ruins of its capital, waiting centuries to be rediscovered. In the next and final chapter, we will see how that legacy was recovered by modern archaeology, and how the image of the Hittites went from being a forgotten mystery to occupying a central place in our understanding of the Bronze Age. After the fall of Hattusa and the dissolution of central power, the Hittite world seemed to fade into the silence of the Dark Age that followed the collapse of the Bronze Age. However, its legacy did not disappear entirely. Fragments of its culture, language, and religion survived in the Neo-Hittite kingdoms that emerged in southern Anatolia and northern Syria, and in the memory of its former enemies and allies. For centuries, these traces were like embers glowing beneath the ashes, waiting for the moment to shine again. The Neo-Hittite kingdoms, such as Carchemish, Melid, Tabal, and others, preserved part of Hatti's political organization and traditions. Their kings still used titles and symbols inherited from the Great Imperial era, and their cities were decorated with stone reliefs depicting religious and military scenes in the Hittite style. The Luwian language, a close relative of Hittite, continued to be used in hieroglyphic inscriptions decorating walls and stelae. These kingdoms, however, were regional entities, without the military or diplomatic capacity of their predecessor. Within a few centuries, Assyrian expansion absorbed them one by one, integrating them into a new imperial order. In the oral and written tradition of other peoples, the Hittites survived as a distant memory. The Hebrew Bible mentions the Hittites, or Hittites, as one of the peoples of Canaan, although these references probably refer to late or Neo-Hittite groups rather than to the classical empire. For the Greeks of antiquity, the Hittites were no longer a political actor, but an echo of a remote past, mixed with local legends and stories transmitted by Phoenicians and Syrians. For more than 2 millennia, the name and history of the Hittites remained buried literally and figuratively beneath layers of earth and oblivion. It was only in the 19th century that the first clues began to emerge, in a context in which archaeology and philology were making giant strides in reconstructing the ancient world. European explorers and diplomats traveling through Anatolia began to notice monumental ruins and strange hieroglyphic inscriptions in places such as Aleppo, Carchemish, and Boghaskoy, the future Hattusa. These inscriptions did not correspond to Mesopotamian cuneiform or Egyptian hieroglyphs, but to an unknown system composed of stylized figures of animals, objects, and geometric symbols. At first, it was thought that they might be remnants of some forgotten branch of hieroglyphic writing. At the end of the 19th century, excavations at Boghaskoy began to reveal something extraordinary. Extensive cyclopean walls, gates decorated with reliefs, and, most importantly, thousands of clay tablets written in cuneiform. Archaeologists soon understood that they were standing before the archive of a great palace, and that the tablets were not written in Akkadian, the diplomatic language of the period, but in an Indo-European language unknown. Until then, it was the Czech philologist Bedřich Hrozný who, in 1915, deciphered the Hittite language. Analyzing the tablets from Boghaskoy, he recognized words and structures reminiscent of Latin, Greek, and other Indo-European languages. His famous phrase, "Nu ninda an ezateni watama ekuteni, now you will eat bread and drink water," demonstrated irrefutably that Hittite was the oldest Indo-European language known to us. This discovery not only returned the Hittites to history, but greatly expanded our knowledge of the origin and spread of the Indo-European languages. Excavations at Hattusa and other sites such as Yazilikaya, Alakahoyuk, and Carchemish have made it possible to reconstruct essential aspects of Hittite life, their monumental architecture, their art, their religion, and their diplomatic network. The tablets revealed peace treaties, legal codes, lists of gods, ritual manuals, diplomatic letters, and even mythical stories such as the tale of the god Telepinu, whose disappearance causes chaos in the world until he is found and restored. One of the most important discoveries was the Treaty of Kadesh, found in both Hittite and Egyptian versions. This document not only confirmed ancient accounts of the battle, but became a modern symbol of diplomacy. A copy of the treaty hangs today at the headquarters of the United Nations in New York. The rediscovery of the Hittites transformed our understanding of the Bronze Age world. Before their identification, it was believed that the international stage of that time was dominated by Egypt, Babylon, and Assyria, with a few minor powers on the margins. The appearance of Hatti on the map revealed a much more complex balance of power, in which the Hittites played a central role, negotiating, warring, and allying with the other great powers in a diplomatic system that, in a way, foreshadowed the modern concert of nations. Today, the Hittite legacy is recognized not only in museums and academia, but also in the cultural memory of Turkey, which considers the Hittites part of its historical heritage. The walls and temples of Hattusa are a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and each year they attract visitors who walk through the same gates and streets where kings, soldiers, and priests paraded more than 3 millennia ago. Academically, the study of Hittite and related Anatolian languages has made it possible to reconstruct very early stages of the Indo-European family, providing clues about how these languages developed and spread across Eurasia. Likewise, Hittite religion, with its ability to integrate diverse pantheons, is studied as an early model of religious syncretism and cultural management in multicultural empires. The rebirth of the Hittites in modern consciousness is, in itself, a reminder that history is always incomplete. For centuries, an empire that had rivaled Egypt and signed peace treaties that we still admire remained invisible to us. Its rediscovery reminds us that there are still chapters of human history buried beneath the earth waiting to be told. Today, when the wind blows among the ruins of Hattusa and the sun lights the worn stones of Yazilikaya, it is possible to imagine the echo of the priests' footsteps, the clamor of processions, and the murmur of scribes working on the tablets that, without knowing it, would ensure that their world would not be completely lost. The story of the Hittites is the story of how a people that emerged from the mountains of Anatolia became an arbiter of power in the eastern Mediterranean, and how, thousands of years later, it returned to occupy its place in the memory of humanity.